Florida, 2018. I had given everything to Marcus. When his father died, I didn't pause. I wiped my tears, put on my old sneakers, and went out to clean offices downtown, polishing the floors of people who never bothered to learn my name. I scrubbed bathrooms on Christmas Eve, ironed shirts until dawn, went hungry some nights so my son could eat. I thought that was what mothers did. I thought love meant you bent until your bones forgot how to stand straight. That little yellow house, the one with the hibiscus and sun-bleached siding, was built with my spine. Every nail, every coat of paint, paid for in hours I'll never get back. I remember when Marcus was little, how he'd run through the hallways in socks too big for his feet, laugh bouncing off the walls. I kept every crayon drawing. I even framed one. He called it us. I used to believe sacrifices meant something. That one day when the struggle was behind us, we'd sit together on that porch, sweet tea in hand, and he'd say, "Thank you, Mom. I see you now." But that day never came. Instead, I watched him drift further away, each success like a rung up a ladder I was never meant to climb. After college, after the wedding, after Layla was born, I became a footnote. Karina, all long lashes and sharper words, never liked how I reminded her of struggle. She wore her disdain like perfume, subtle but always present. It started small. Comments about my old stove, the uneven floorboards, the garden being a bit much for someone your age. I smiled always. I thought if I stayed quiet, they'd remember who I was. But I was wrong. The worst came on a Tuesday. Ordinary day. Sunlight soft against the blinds. I'd made cornbread for Layla, her favorite. They arrived unannounced, stood in my living room like they owned the air. Karina didn't sit. Marcus looked uncomfortable, eyes scanning the photos on the wall like he didn't recognize them. Or me. "We've been talking," he said, his tone too careful. "About your future." Karina added, "This house, it's just too much for you now. The stairs, the heat. Wouldn't a retirement community be safer?" My hands were still dusted with flour. "I'm not leaving my home," I said. Karina smiled with her teeth. "Think of it as a transition. Peaceful. Layla won't even notice you're gone. You'll have everything you need." Marcus looked away. "She needs your house, Mom," he finally admitted. "We want to remodel. Expand." Just like that, it all made sense. The distance, the fake concern, the carefully rehearsed script. I was no longer a mother. I was a property transfer, an inconvenience with a heartbeat. I looked at my son, my legacy, and I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I just smiled soft and slow and said, "Get out." They didn't understand. Not yet. You see, what they didn't know is that while they were busy measuring my worth by what I could give them, I was planning my own quiet ending. The house was no longer in Marcus's inheritance. I had changed the will. The deed now named the community center, where Layla and I used to volunteer, as its beneficiary. The savings I'd quietly amassed, the account they never asked about, that would fund scholarships for girls with hands like mine, rough from work, strong from love. They'd smile for their cameras, post curated photos of a life built on lies. And I'd disappear like mist, forgotten maybe, but free. Let them believe I was just a tired, old woman in a scarf. Let them learn, too late, that a mother who has given everything and been left with nothing is not weak. She is unstoppable. The oppressive heat of a Tampa summer morning pressed heavily on Evelyn Walker as she stood in her kitchen, slicing mangoes for breakfast. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and a sudden wave of dizziness overtook her. Her vision blurred, and before she could grasp the counter, her knees buckled. She collapsed onto the linoleum floor, the knife clattering beside her. When she regained consciousness, the mangoes lay scattered and her head throbbed. Evelyn attributed the episode to dehydration and exhaustion, a consequence of the relentless Florida sun and her refusal to slow down. She pulled herself up, sipped water, and resolved to rest, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of her exile. Marcus and Karina arrived that evening, their faces etched with feigned concern. They had been alerted by a neighbor who saw Evelyn's lights on late and grew worried. Marcus insisted on checking her vitals while Karina hovered nearby, her perfume sharp in the humid air. They suggested a doctor's visit, claiming it was for her safety. Evelyn, still shaken, agreed, trusting their intentions. The next day, they returned with a plan for an outing, framing it as a chance to pamper her. They promised a quick trip to a clinic followed by lunch at a nearby diner. Evelyn, weary but reassured by their attention, climbed into their air conditioned SUV, wearing her usual cotton dress and sandals, carrying only her purse. The drive took them past familiar landmarks: the church where Evelyn volunteered, the park where Layla once chased butterflies, but the route grew unfamiliar as they left the city center. The SUV pulled into the parking lot of a low, beige building on the outskirts of Tampa, its sign reading Sunset Care Facility. Palm trees lined the entrance, but their fronds drooped in the heat, mirroring the building's lifeless aura. Evelyn assumed it was a medical office, but as Marcus guided her through the glass doors, she noticed the sterile smell of disinfectant and the distant hum of a television. A nurse greeted them, clipboard in hand, and led Evelyn to a small room with faded floral wallpaper and a single bed draped in a thin, gray blanket. Arcus explained that she needed to stay for observation, just for a day or two, to ensure she was stable. Karina nodded, her smile tight, as she placed Evelyn's purse on a plastic chair. They promised to return soon, their voices smooth and practiced. Evelyn, confused but too tired to argue, watched them leave, their footsteps echoing down the hallway. The nurse handed her a form to sign, but Evelyn's hands trembled and she asked to read it later. Alone in the room, she sat on the bed, its springs creaking under her weight. The absence of her belongings, no photos, no quilt, no hibiscus-scented air, made the space feel like a prison. Days passed, and neither Marcus nor Karina returned. Evelyn's requests to call her son were met with vague excuses about visiting hours. She noticed the staff's pitying glances, their whispers about her supposed confusion. On the third day, a social worker showed her a file bearing her name. It contained documents signed by Marcus, claiming she suffered from dementia and was unfit to live alone. The forms authorized her long-term placement and granted Marcus power of attorney over her affairs. Evelyn's heart sank as she read the lies, her son's signature a stark betrayal. She learned from a sympathetic aide that Marcus and Karina had moved into her yellow house, their furniture replacing hers, their laughter filling rooms she had scrubbed clean. Evelyn's attempts to contact Marcus were futile. Her calls went to voicemail, and a single attempt to reach Karina resulted in a blocked number. She sat by the room's narrow window, overlooking a concrete courtyard where other residents shuffled aimlessly, some muttering to themselves, others staring blankly at the sky. The weight of abandonment pressed against her chest, sharper than any physical pain. She discovered her bank account had been frozen, her modest savings inaccessible. Neighbors, misled by Marcus's stories, believed she was too frail to manage alone. Karina had even changed the locks on the house, erasing Evelyn's presence as if she had already passed. The room's sterile emptiness mirrored Evelyn's growing sense of loss. Her clothes, left behind, were likely discarded, and her garden, she imagined, was wilting under neglect. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have anticipated, not just because of Marcus's actions, but because of the life she had poured into him. Every missed meal, every extra shift, every pawned treasure had been for him, and now he had cast her aside. Yet amidst the despair, a spark of defiance flickered. Evelyn refused to let her son redefine her existence. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, and vowed to reclaim her life, no matter the cost. The sterile confines of Sunset Care Facility could not dull Evelyn Walker's resolve. Despite the betrayal that had landed her in this beige-walled prison, her mind remained as sharp as ever, a steel trap honed by years of meticulous budgeting and quiet endurance. She spent her days observing the routines of the staff, noting their shifts and the moments when they were distracted. On the fourth morning, she approached a kind-faced nurse during a quiet hour and requested a notebook, claiming she wished to jot down memories to keep her thoughts clear. The nurse, sympathetic to the woman she assumed was frail, retrieved a small, spiral-bound pad from the activities closet and handed it to Evelyn with a gentle smile. Evelyn retreated to her room and sat by the narrow window, the notebook open on her lap. She did not write sentimental reflections or prayers. Instead, she filled the pages with precise details: the account number of her savings, the address of her yellow house, the name of the bank manager who had helped her open her pension account years ago. She listed contacts from her past, church friends, former coworkers, and most crucially, Lorenza Davis, the attorney who had drafted her will a decade earlier. Evelyn had not spoken to Lorenza in years, but she remembered the woman's no-nonsense demeanor and her promise to always keep Evelyn's file active. Each entry was a thread in the web. She began to weave a plan to reclaim her life. Using the facility's communal phone, Evelyn left a voicemail for Lorenza, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She outlined the essentials: Marcus's forgery, the unauthorized placement in the nursing home, and her frozen bank account. She mentioned the deed to her house, still in her name, and her suspicion that Marcus had manipulated neighbors into believing she was senile. The call was brief, but every word carried the weight of her determination. She hung up and waited, her gaze fixed on the courtyard below, where palm trees cast long shadows across the cracked pavement. The waiting was agonizing, each hour stretching into eternity, but Evelyn refused to let despair take root. Lorenza returned the call the next afternoon, her tone brisk but laced with concern. She confirmed Evelyn's fears. Marcus had forged a power of attorney document, granting himself control over her finances and property. The house, however, remained solely in Evelyn's name, a fact Marcus had overlooked in his haste. Lorenza arranged for a doctor from an independent clinic to visit the facility and conduct a cognitive evaluation. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a calm demeanor, spent an hour with Evelyn, asking questions about her daily routines, her family history, and recent events. Evelyn answered with clarity, recalling details of her life with precision. The evaluation concluded what Evelyn already knew. She was fully competent, with no trace of dementia. Armed with the doctor's report, Lorenza filed an emergency motion to revoke the forged power of attorney. She also requested a court order to release Evelyn from the facility, citing unlawful confinement. The legal wheels turned swiftly, and by the end of the week, Lorenza arrived at Sunset Care Facility in a navy blazer, her briefcase bulging with documents. She met Evelyn in the common room, ignoring the nervous glances of the staff. The facility's administrator attempted to explain their actions as being in Evelyn's best interest, but Lorenza dismissed the excuses with a wave of her hand. She escorted Evelyn out of the building, the older woman carrying nothing but the notebook and the clothes she wore. The air outside was thick with humidity, but to Evelyn, it tasted of freedom. Lorenza drove her to a nearby motel, a temporary haven while they planned the next steps. Over a cup of weak coffee in the motel's diner, Evelyn's thoughts crystallized into a strategy that went beyond reclaiming her property. She wanted Marcus to feel the weight of his betrayal, to see her resilience every day. She envisioned selling her beloved yellow house, not out of defeat, but as a calculated move to sever Marcus's claim to her legacy. With the proceeds, she would buy a home nearby, close enough to be a constant presence in his life, a living reminder of his actions. Evelyn's plan was not born of rage, but of a quiet, deliberate fury. She saw herself sitting on a porch, her hibiscus bushes blooming vibrantly, while Marcus and Karina grappled with the consequences of their greed. The house she would buy would be modest, like her current one, but it would be hers alone, a sanctuary she controlled. She imagined Layla visiting, her granddaughter's laughter filling the space, free from the lies Marcus had spun. As she sat in the motel room, the notebook now filled with her battle plan, Evelyn felt a surge of purpose. She was not defeated. She was a seed, buried but ready to break through the soil. The legal machinery set in motion by Lorenza Davis moved with relentless precision, cutting through the web of deceit Marcus had spun. Evelyn Walker's yellow house, the cornerstone of her sacrifices, remained hers by law, and Lorenza filed a petition for its forced sale, leveraging the fact that Marcus and Karina had no legal claim to occupy it. The court proceedings unfolded swiftly in a Tampa courthouse, where Marcus's attempts to contest the sale faltered against the ironclad evidence of his forgery. He and Karina received the summons at dawn, delivered by a process server who noted their stunned silence. The judge, unmoved by their last-minute pleas, ruled in Evelyn's favor, ordering the property to be sold and the proceeds delivered to her alone. The sale attracted a young couple, new to Tampa, who saw the house as a fresh start. They admired its sunny exterior, the hibiscus bushes Evelyn had nurtured, and the sturdy bones of a home built on resilience. The closing took place within weeks, and Evelyn watched from a distance as the couple moved in, their laughter echoing through the rooms she once scrubbed clean. The money from the sale, wired to a new account Lorenza had secured, gave Evelyn a sense of power she hadn't felt in years. She refused to return to the motel, instead directing Lorenza to find a new home, one that would serve as both sanctuary and statement. Lorenza located a bungalow across the street from Marcus's now former residence, a single-story haven with white stucco walls and a tiled roof that gleamed under the Florida sun. Its front yard boasted a row of palm trees, their fronds swaying gently, and a veranda that offered a clear view of the house Marcus and Karina still occupied. Evelyn purchased it outright, the transaction completed with a cashier's check that left no trace of debt. She moved in on a humid morning, her possessions limited to a suitcase of clothes Lorenza had bought and the notebook that had become her lifeline. The bungalow's interior was simple: hardwood floors, a small kitchen, a bedroom with a window facing the street, but it felt like a kingdom she had reclaimed. Evelyn wasted no time making the space her own. She planted hibiscus bushes along the front fence, their crimson blooms a defiant splash of color against the green lawn. She hung sheer curtains in the living room, allowing light to filter through while maintaining her privacy. Each morning, she carried a mug of coffee to the veranda, settling into a wicker chair to watch the neighborhood wake. Her presence was deliberate, a silent proclamation of her survival. She waved at passing neighbors, many of whom had heard whispers of Marcus's actions, and offered her nods of quiet respect. The church ladies, in particular, stopped by with casseroles, their visits a subtle rebuke to the son who had discarded her. Across the street, Marcus and Karina felt the weight of Evelyn's gaze, though she never stared directly. Marcus avoided the front yard, hurrying to his car with his head down, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. Karina, more defiant, pulled the curtains tightly shut, their floral patterns now a barrier against Evelyn's existence. She parked her car on the far side of the driveway, as if the extra distance could shield her from the truth. Evelyn noticed these changes but remained unruffled. She tended her garden, her hands steady as she pruned the hibiscus or watered the grass, each act a reaffirmation of her agency. The bungalow's veranda became her throne, a place where she sipped coffee and watched the world bend to her will. The neighborhood buzzed with unspoken acknowledgement of Evelyn's return. The couple who bought her old house invited her for tea, thanking her for the home's warmth, unaware of the pain it had witnessed. Evelyn smiled, her heart lightened by their gratitude, and brought them a loaf of her cornbread as a housewarming gift. She walked the streets of her suburb, her steps slow but purposeful, reclaiming her place in a community that had been misled by Marcus's lies. Her presence across the street was a quiet storm, eroding the facade Marcus and Karina had built. Evelyn felt no need to confront them directly. Her existence, vibrant and unyielding, was confrontation enough. The air in Evelyn Walker's Tampa neighborhood grew heavier as the summer of 2018 dragged on, but her bungalow remained a beacon of quiet defiance. Across the street, the house Marcus and Karina occupied began to unravel, its once polished exterior betraying signs of neglect: unmowed grass, a sagging mailbox, curtains perpetually drawn. Evelyn's presence, unwavering and deliberate, cast a shadow over their lives, her daily rituals on the veranda a constant reminder of the betrayal they could not escape. She tended her hibiscus bushes with care, their vibrant blooms a stark contrast to the decay creeping into the home opposite, and sipped coffee each morning, her gaze steady but never confrontational. Marcus, once confident in his claim to Evelyn's legacy, withdrew into himself. He rarely left the house, his car collecting dust in the driveway, its windshield streaked with pollen. When he did emerge, his movements were sluggish, his eyes avoiding the bungalow where his mother now thrived. The weight of his actions pressed upon him, amplified by the neighborhood's silent judgment. Neighbors who once greeted him warmly now offered only curt nods, their allegiance shifting to Evelyn, whose resilience had become a local legend. Marcus's isolation deepened, his days spent in the dim glow of the living room, the television flickering with shows he barely watched. Karina, unable to bear the scrutiny of Evelyn's proximity, sought refuge in distraction. She filled the backyard with raucous gatherings, inviting friends for barbecues that stretched late into the night. The music blared, a chaotic mix of pop and hip hop, as if volume could drown out her shame. She laughed loudly, her voice carrying across the street, but the forced merriment fooled no one. Evelyn, unfazed, continued her routines, watering her garden, baking cornbread, chatting with passers-by, her calm presence a rebuke to Karina's theatrics. The parties grew less frequent as Karina's energy waned, her defiance crumbling under the reality she could not outrun. One humid evening, Karina packed her belongings into a suitcase, her movements frantic. She loaded her car with boxes of clothes and trinkets, her face set in a grimace of resolve. Without a glance at Marcus, who stood motionless on the porch, she drove away, the taillights of her sedan disappearing toward the highway to Orlando, where her family awaited. The house fell silent, its emptiness a mirror to Marcus's desolation. He sat alone on the couch, surrounded by half-empty wine glasses and scattered party decorations, the remnants of a life that had slipped through his fingers. The absence of Karina's frenetic energy left a void, and Marcus made no effort to fill it. Layla, Evelyn's 15-year-old granddaughter, began to drift toward her grandmother's bungalow. She had overheard fragments of the truth from neighbors and pieced together the story of her parents' betrayal. One afternoon, she appeared at Evelyn's door, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her expression a mix of curiosity and guilt. Evelyn welcomed her without question, offering a glass of iced tea and a seat on the veranda. Layla returned the next day, and the day after, drawn to the warmth of Evelyn's home. She helped knead dough for biscuits, listened to stories of her great-grandfather's fishing trips, and learned to prune the hibiscus bushes with a gentleness Evelyn hadn't expected. As weeks passed, Layla's visits lengthened, her presence a quiet rebellion against her parents' actions. She began staying overnight, her school book spread across Evelyn's kitchen table, her laughter filling the bungalow. Evelyn taught her to make sweet potato pie, the recipe passed down from her own mother, and shared tales of Tampa's past, its vibrant markets, its hurricanes, its unspoken rules of community. Layla absorbed these lessons, her eyes bright with a hunger for connection that Marcus had never nurtured. She rarely mentioned her father, and when she did, it was with a sadness that Evelyn understood but did not press. Evelyn's focus shifted entirely to Layla, her granddaughter's presence a balm for the wounds Marcus had inflicted. She rearranged the spare room, adding a colorful quilt and a desk for Layla's studies, creating a space that felt like home. The bungalow, once a symbol of Evelyn's defiance, became a haven for them both, its walls echoing with shared stories and the clink of dishes. Evelyn made no attempt to reach out to Marcus, her heart hardened against the son who had discarded her. She saw his silhouette through the curtains at night, a lonely figure in a house that no longer held life, and felt neither pity nor triumph, only the certainty that her path now lay with Layla. The Tampa sun rose over Evelyn Walker's bungalow, casting long shadows from the palm trees onto her hibiscus-lined lawn. Layla's presence had transformed the house into a vibrant sanctuary, her school books and laughter now as much a part of it as Evelyn's steady routines. Evelyn, resolute in her independence, turned her attention to securing her legacy, determined to protect Layla and others like herself from the pain she had endured. She contacted Lorenza Davis, her attorney, to revise her will, a task she approached with the same meticulous care she had once applied to balancing her checkbook. The process was not driven by vengeance, but by a clear-eyed commitment to justice. Evelyn's new will left no room for ambiguity. She bequeathed her bungalow and the bulk of her savings to Layla, to be held in trust until her granddaughter turned 21. The funds would cover Layla's education, from college tuition to art supplies, ensuring she had the opportunities Evelyn had fought to provide for Marcus. The remaining assets, proceeds from the sale of her yellow house, her pension, and a small life insurance policy, were allocated to a community fund Evelyn established through the local church. Named the Walker Dignity Fund, it aimed to support elderly residents, particularly women who had been abandoned or exploited by their families. Evelyn donated an initial sum of $20,000, a quiet act of defiance against a world that too often discarded its elders. When Marcus learned of the will weeks later through a curt letter from Lorenza, he reached out to Evelyn. His calls went unanswered, his messages ignored. Evelyn had no interest in his explanations or apologies, her heart fortified by the boundaries she had set. She focused instead on Layla, who had fully settled into the bungalow, her bedroom now adorned with posters and a shelf of books Evelyn had bought secondhand. Layla thrived under her grandmother's care, her grades improving, her confidence blooming. She joined a school gardening club, inspired by Evelyn's love for her hibiscus, and brought home seedlings to plant in the backyard, their shared labor a bond deeper than words. Marcus's house across the street stood empty by late summer, its windows dark, its driveway bare. He had sold it hastily, the transaction handled by a real estate agent who left a faded sold sign leaning against the mailbox. Neighbors whispered that Marcus had left Tampa, some saying he moved to Miami, others claiming he had taken a job in Georgia. Evelyn neither knew nor cared. His departure marked the final severing of a tie she had once held sacred, and she felt only relief as she watched the new owners, a family with young children, move in, their voices bringing life back to the street. She brought them a basket of muffins, her gesture a quiet blessing for their fresh start. Evelyn's days filled with purpose. She accepted an invitation to speak at a community forum on elder rights, organized by the church. Standing before a small crowd, mostly women her age, she shared her story, not with anger, but with a calm authority that held the room captive. She spoke of financial abuse, the dangers of forged documents, and the power of knowing one's legal rights. Her words resonated, sparking nods and a few tears among the audience. One woman approached her afterward, gripping her hand, her eyes reflecting a shared struggle. Evelyn returned home that evening, her heart full, knowing she had planted seeds of courage in others. The bungalow became a hub of small joys. Evelyn taught Layla to bake sweet potato pie, the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and nutmeg as they worked side by side. They tended the garden together, planting tomatoes and marigolds, the soil a canvas for their shared dreams. Layla's laughter echoed through the house, a sound that healed the scars of Evelyn's past. On weekends, they sat on the veranda, sipping iced tea and watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. Evelyn began painting again, a hobby she had abandoned decades ago, filling canvases with images of Tampa's palms and Layla's radiant smile. The Walker Dignity Fund grew, bolstered by Evelyn's contributions and donations from the community, who admired her quiet strength. It funded transportation services for seniors, legal aid for those facing exploitation, and social events to combat loneliness. Evelyn attended the fund's first event, a picnic under the oaks at a local park, where she watched elderly women share stories and laughter, their faces alight with dignity reclaimed. She stood at the edge of the gathering, her heart steady, knowing her pain had birthed something enduring. The bungalow, once a symbol of defiance, now stood as a testament to freedom, its walls holding not just Evelyn's story, but the promise of a new beginning for her and Layla.